Hello everyone, welcome to ARC Talks Presents, a program brought to you by EPCC Architecture Society. Today I will be interviewing Anthony Criccho, a professor at the University of Oklahoma. I will be your host, David Ruiz, Vice President of the Architecture Society. We hope you enjoy the program. Alright, how are you doing today?
I'm okay. We're getting a lot of rain today.
Really?
Which is nice in the summertime.
Are you located in Oklahoma at the moment?
Yes, I am. I'm in Norman, Oklahoma.
So how's the weather over there? It's literally raining.
It's been hot and humid, but looks like we're gonna have about 3 or 4 days of continuous rain, which is very unusual for the summer. But I will definitely take it.
I'm located in El Paso, and that's how it was last week. Like pretty much it was like really hot, and then out of the nowhere it started raining like for 4 days in a row.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So I have some questions for you. I wanted to ask, can you talk about your experience as a student at UT Arlington? Because I know you have your bachelor's and your master's from there.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll just talk about my experiences there.
Yeah, that'll be the first question.
Okay. I went to school in architecture at the University of Texas at Arlington in the late 80s and early to mid 90s. I didn't know at first I wanted to go into architecture. I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer, and my last couple of weeks in high school, I realized I didn't like calculus, so I decided to look for something else, and I saw architecture I like to draw, and so I switched on the day I went to go sign up for classes, and I figured, well, if I like it in first year, I'll stay. If not, I'll go do something else. And so I got hooked, and I got my undergraduate there, and I kind of spread it out because at the time there wasn't a lot of work. When I was a senior, it was a sort of a downturn in the economy. So I decided to kind of spread it out because I did finally get an internship, and then I went directly into grad school because there wasn't any really good jobs at the time. By the time I got out of grad school, the economy changed and there were a lot of jobs. So I was there a total of about 7 years. And one of the exciting experiences I had was I studied abroad. I went on their Rome program in the summer. And I actually did it twice. I did it once as an undergrad and once as a grad student. And that sort of has stimulated what I'm doing here as a professor. So it's kind of interesting. And that's where I met your professor, by the way.
Emmanuel. Yeah.
Yes.
And then how was your experience as a professor at Oklahoma?
At Oklahoma? It's different. It's different than my experiences as a student at UT Arlington. And this is with all schools. All architecture schools are a little bit different. I'm actually a professor who goes around and accredits other schools. I'm part of a team. And so I've seen many, many different schools. And each school's a little bit different in how they approach teaching architecture. And at University of Oklahoma, it's been a school for over 100 years. And so it's got some traditions that have been lost and then gained back. There was a very influential director in the 1950s, architect named Bruce Goff, and he did this, when people look at this, it was wild and crazy at the time and so forth. And a lot of that legacy of that time, even though it was roughly 70 years ago, is still sort of ingrained in the school. And it's sort of looking at design at a broader aspect. You could really look at anything and take a design inspiration from that. And that was sort of an idea that Bruce Goff had. And it's still prevalent today. Now, is the design and the look of the architecture the same? No. But the idea and the thought is the same. And that's something at the University of Oklahoma we've sort of brought back. In the past 3 years, we've actually looked back at Bruce Goff and his students. His students are now in their 80s, and they're kind of older. And so we're trying to interview them and find out, what it was like at school at the time, and some of the ideas and things that we're actually using today. Just we didn't realize it, but we are. It's sort of the legacy is brought down. So I think the biggest difference between OU and, let's say, UT Arlington is that legacy. UTA is technically, in the terms of architecture schools, not that very old. And so their legacy, I don't think they've figured their legacy out yet. And it's changing at the time, which can be looked at as good or bad. But I think it's a big aspect of any school. And I would say that's something that, coming to OU, I didn't realize until 15 years later. And I realized that that's a very important part of a school, is the legacy that's left and kind of continues. And every school has it. You just have to find it.
And what do you think is the difference between, like, the students before and now? Like, what can you see in difference that, like, maybe they used to do and now we don't do it, or maybe vice versa?
I think the biggest challenge now than, let's say, when I first started, I started teaching later than most faculty. I actually worked in the profession for a while, for about 8 to 10 years. So I have that background. So I started in the early 2000s teaching. And I think from then until now, the biggest change is, as students, you try to find the shortcut. You want to know the end and how to get to the end. And the end is what's needed to be done. And that's not the skill you need to know how to do in architecture. You need to understand how to solve a problem. And there's many different ways to solve it. And I think that's the big difference, is being open-minded. Students are not necessarily as open-minded, which is surprising, as former year levels and students from the past. Now it's like, okay, tell me exactly what I need to do to exactly get this thing that you want. And it's like, when I teach, it's like, I don't know what I want, so don't ask me. And my guess is your professor does the same thing.
Yeah.
We were taught that. So he probably does the same thing.
Yeah, I used to, like, when we had a project, there was people that asking for, like, step by step. He was like, you can figure it out, and you'll find out your creativity too.
Yes.
Some of the people were like, it's because I don't feel creative, this and that. So he tried to kind of, like, push you to that a limit where you're like, well, let me do it by myself. Let me think about it. Let me get like all creative and stuff. So yeah, he's literally like that.
Yeah. We teach alike.
Really?
Actually, I would say it came from some of the professors we had. So.
And then bring it back to UT Arlington. How was your experience at Rome?
In Rome?
Because you said
that the study abroad program there, which is a summer program. It's like 3 to 4 weeks. In terms of, because I've been study abroad here at University of Oklahoma, and actually have a meeting in a couple of days for our students going, and it's a semester-long program. But the UTA program, it significantly changed my way of looking at architecture and sort of changed my way of looking at things. I think the major thing was I traveled. I was lucky when I was a child. My parents, we traveled in the United States a lot. We didn't travel abroad, and so that was my first time out of the country, and it got me to open my eyes, seeing how other people live. And I think that opened my eyes that I wanted to go again, because and I wanted to go elsewhere in Europe and so forth. And I think that is something that opened my eyes up, and I think it changed my way of design and understanding design, and how important it is, and how important it is to understand your client in different countries or wherever you're at. I think it opened my eyes, and seeing some of the things you've seen in your history class and see it in person, and actually to touch it and smell it and to see it and all your senses there and being in the space is a big deal. And you can't really see it. You can't really have the same experience if you're just looking at it in a slide or even in virtual reality. It's not quite. It's getting close. For instance, I teach an architectural history class for incoming students in graduate school, and they come from different disciplines. They come from all over, and I've used a couple of virtual reality goggles a couple of times in class, and we actually like went into the Pantheon, because you can go in there and you can see it. And I tell them, it's pretty, spatially you can look around and see in the glasses, and it does a good job. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't have the sound where you're in there. It doesn't have the smells. You can't, like, the feeling of walking on the stone that's in there, and it's unlevel. A lot of people think it's flat. It's not, and because it drains to the outside. So when the rain comes down through the hole, it drains to the perimeter. So it's a slight angle, and you can feel it. Plus, all the people who've walked on it over the years, it's not really flat either. So I think that, going back to talking about Rome, it significantly changed me, because I've led a couple of now at teaching. I've gone to Rome a number more times and have taught students there. So it's fun falling back to me. It's one of the things that actually a big impression on my life.
One of the things that surprised me a lot, it's the size. I've never been to Rome, but when I see the picture and I see the difference between the building and between the people. So it's like a huge, huge difference, and that's where like I can tell the difference in size, like all the space. That's like where it amazes me, because it's
the scale of things, and it's really, in what's difficult in some of it, especially like St. Peter's is so well designed proportionally that, because it's so big. So when you see pictures of it, everything's in the right proportion. But if you really look, like, for instance, if you look at a picture from St. Peter's looking up at the facade, it's well proportioned, well designed. But most people don't realize, if you look real closely, you see how tall people are. And you look at the door, and you barely can see them, because it's so big. And in pictures and everything, because it's so well portrayed, you don't know that unless you really look. But when you're there, you get the feeling of it, because you can see it. You can stand next to a column that the base of the column is taller than you, rather than just like 3 or 4 inches at the bottom. It's taller than you. So you get the feeling of scale when you're there. And that's something it's always difficult for me to explain to students when they're looking at a slide or telling them, like, the scale of this is different. It's massive. And yeah, you probably saw that, but it's everything in Rome. And then the way the city is built upon itself. It's layer upon layer upon layer, which there aren't many cities, especially in the United States, that are built that way. It's not that old. So showing students what it looked like, actually going down, 60, 70 feet in a building, and you go down the bottom, there's this one church, you go down the bottom, you go down 4 different levels. And at the very bottom, which is about 70 feet down, used to be the street level. So you're walking down through these old houses down there that has been built upon and built upon and built upon, which is mind-boggling for students. It's actually one of the first places I go with students. And they don't realize. So when I take them to this, from the outside, it's a 17th century church, nondescript church. But when you go down different levels, and you see the differences of the periods. And actually, at the very bottom is a street, and along that street is a stream, and it's still there. It's just an underground stream now. But you can see it and stick your hand in it and stuff. It's kind of cool.
It's
But
very,
yeah, it's the layering of Rome, which is something that most students have never been or understand.
yeah, because
And
it's very different than like the experience we have in the United States. Because over here, I feel like everything's similar to each city. Like they might look different, but we all have like something in similar. And over there, it's like a total different experience in history, architecture, everything.
yeah, and it changes actually in Europe too. I mean, there's some other cities that are sort of like that, but they're not. So if you go to some of the other major cities like Paris or let's say London, they have a history, but a lot of their history isn't layered. Or if it is, it's gone. They don't have, like for instance, Paris was a Roman town, so it still has the basic layout of the Roman town, but they have very few ruins from that period. There's like 2 or 3 that you can actually see, because a lot of it has been torn down and rebuilt, and nothing was left. Versus in Rome, they just build on top of it. They literally destroyed the building, left the rubble there, and they just built on top because there was no place to take the stuff. So in Rome is actually built up on top of one another. And in most cases, with buildings in the center of Rome, a lot of the building owners don't know what's underneath their building, because it's a layer upon layer. Even to the point of they tried to tunnel a new subway line directly through the middle of the city, and they had to stop because they kept hitting ruins, and so they just stopped because it wasn't. It would take them forever to do it. No matter how deep they went pretty deep, and they still were hitting things. So that's, I don't know where we're going with this, but anyway, yeah, I like taking students to Rome.
What's one of the things that you'll be telling the students to keep an eye on when you go over there, like in a way of architecture, like keep an eye on this type of design or anything like that?
What's interesting about Rome is there's not many new buildings there. From after World War II, there was very few new buildings in the center. Now, when you go outside the center and outside, there are some very new buildings, but they're very limited. Versus, let's say you went to London or Paris or some of the northern cities, in Germany and so forth, when you're going to Europe. So I tell students, look at how they've integrated new into the old, because they've done it. They do that a lot, and they do it very well. So there may be an old building, and from the outside, it's 400 years old, but when you go inside, it's brand new. And I tell students, look at the details. That's what I tell students when they're in Rome. Look at the details, even from the old stuff, from ancient times to now. Look at how things are put together, how things new are integrated into the old. Because I tell students that is something you can take back to the United States, because a lot of work when you get out is renovation, and knowing how to incorporate something new into the old is something in school we don't do a good job at. We don't really give y'all a project. Normally it's a brand new project on a brand new site, versus giving you something old and say, okay, you have to reinterpret this building. And that is something that when we go to Rome, when we go to Europe, that's what I tell students to look at, because they sketch details and stuff. And that's something they can come back and take that information and apply it today. A lot of faculty and a lot of people say, well, why do you want to go over there? It's all old. I say, well, you need to, the people living there aren't living like this 500, 600 years ago. It's a very modern metropolis. And so how do they live and breathe and react to the new experiences? I said, it's there. You just have to look and see how it's done. So I think, and that's traveling anywhere in the world, you can look at that. It's experience. That's what I tell students when you go travel. Look at that. Look how people interact with their architecture, because a lot of it's the same. A lot of it's the same.
I never thought of it that way. Like of traveling, I would only thought of like the details on architecture, but not on the way people live there.
Yeah,
It's a,
I I, I taught a class. The University of Oklahoma has a facility in Italy in this town called Arezzo.
mm,
They actually bought an old monastery. So there's, I think, 40 students can live there, and they have their own rooms and so forth. And I taught a summer class there with students that aren't even in architecture. It was just an open elective. And one of the things we looked at was how movies and how it's portrayed, architecture is portrayed in movies in Italy. And a lot of it has to do with how people interact with it. So one of the things that when we were going to see architecture and art, because part of the class was an art class that another professor was teaching, and so my focus was showing students, watch people and how they interact with the architecture. And what was nice when we went to Arezzo, Arezzo is not necessarily a tourist town.
mm,
They do have some things. It's famous for a movie that was filmed there, but everyday Italians live there and work there. And so I made a point showing students when we were in a very touristy part of town, when we were in Florence or Rome, versus being in a smaller town where there aren't any tourists. And I think an average person, when you point that out, all of a sudden, they learn things.
mm.
And that is something that I like to point out. And like I said, it doesn't have to be Italy or Rome. It could be anywhere. The same philosophy. When I take students to other parts of the world, that's what I tell them to look at. So, and that's important. I think every architecture student at one point in school should travel abroad if they can. I know it's difficult,
Yeah.
but what's nice, especially where you're at, you can just go across the border. Well, not right now, but you're so close to Mexico that you can go to Mexico and see a totally different aspect in architecture, and it's beautiful down there and so forth. So, I tell students, even if they can't, and I said it to stay in the United States, I tell students to focus on, we have students who've never left the state of Oklahoma. And so I tell students, go just to Dallas, go up to Kansas City, go to Arkansas, and seek out some older architecture. Because Oklahoma is not a very old state. It was made a state in the late 1800s. So most of the architecture here in Oklahoma is like 100. If it's 100 years old, or 150 years old, that's old. Right? I know El Paso has older stuff than that. But it's not old. And so I try to get students to look elsewhere and look at some historical things. And so you're going to go to this city or go to that city. You can get there. It's not that expensive. You can go there for a few days. So.
Yeah, I remember my history teacher. He used to tell us like, if you guys can go to Europe, always remember like we're very close to Mexico, and it's like way more cheaper than going to Europe. And like you guys like also have like very interesting things in Mexico. Like for example, all the things like the Aztecs made, the Mayas did. So we always have like that thinking of Europe, but we never think of Mexico as a way of architecture.
What's nice is they have it's similar. I would say it's similar in terms of like Rome, where you've got ancient, and then you've got architecture that was sort of forgotten, which was the ancient, and then brought back some of the things brought back into some of the, like when the Europeans came over, and then now, and it's interesting, and it's very layered too. So I know one place I want to go. I've studied it in the past year or so is Mexico City. I would love to go to Mexico City, and so that was one of my things I was planning on, was to do a trip with our construction science students and go down there with one of our professors. But that's got no travel abroad right now. So.
And then I have another question. What is like the best way you push students to have like bigger expectations or get their creativity out?
I like, for instance, when I teach studio, I always make it a point to try to learn about the students, a little bit about themselves, because I came from a design school that those professors didn't care about learning about us. Only if we were good and if we were there long enough, they kind of get to know us. But I try to get to know students a little bit just to find out what motivates them, because not all things motivate students the same way. And I try to find what that is. And then I tend to push students to find that themselves, find out what enthuses them, what motivates them. And I push them. I don't pull. There's a different way of pulling a student into learning design or learning how to, creativity is not going to get you anywhere. That's the point when I was saying about, students wanting to know the answer. That's pulling students. I try to push them. So I find something that will have them explore things on their own. And it takes a little bit of time to do that, but that's how I tend to do it. And each student's different. And I've had students who have been shy and not talk in a studio environment, and they're real quiet, and found out why they were quiet and help them get out of their quietness to help them and take some of that too and help them explore ideas and explore new ways of creative thinking. But then there's others that are the opposite. They won't shut up in class. So it's kind of like, in those cases, like, calm down, let's look at something else. Or they're very focused and they only see one way of doing something. And in those cases, I have to try to get students to start thinking and looking at things in opposite ways. Keep an open mind, and I think that's what surprises students with me is sometimes I'll take a totally opposite look at something, and it may not work. I tell students my perfect project to give you is one that there is no answer, and to actually fail the project is the right answer. Think about that one.
Yeah, I've never thought of it.
If you think about that, it's like, well, how do you? Well, it's failing because there is no answer. You can't solve the problem, and if you figure that out, that's the A answer. And I've always wanted to do that, but it's difficult. It's very difficult to come up with a project like that, because you can do one that's totally can't be done, and you can figure that out in 5 minutes. So then it's like, what do you do the rest of the semester? So you have to have one that you really don't know, it can't be done until the very end. It's very difficult, but you learn a lot by doing it. And so, most students are doing that anyway. At the end, it's like, well, it's not quite there yet. Well, because you didn't, you can always change in things. Projects can always change. Projects can always get better. That just happen. It's just, in real life, you got budgets. You have to get the job done because they have to, it has to be used. So you make it the best you can at the point of time you're at. That's why I try to get students to think that, because some students will just keep trying to have a new idea, and not taking an idea and trying to make it work. Or in this case now, they just have one idea and they want to make it work. It's like, well, what if your client comes to you and doesn't like it? What are you going to do? You have to start over, or you should have multiple ideas and multiple options. Or when you're meeting with a client, tell them, sometimes you have to think on the fly and you have to come up with an idea on the fly. Can you do that? And a lot of students can't these days. So we're in the class I'm teaching this fall. It's our comprehensive class, which is a class where the students have to design and also make sure that the mechanical, electrical system, it's part of accreditation. You have to show that you understand how a building is put together. And that's one of the things we're going to do, because I'm teaching the graduate level class. And the other professor and I were talking about what we're going to do is in the middle of the semester, just like in a real project in real life, the program may change, or the site may change, or something changes in the middle. And we're going to do that. We're going to change some things up for them. And students do not like that, but it's the real world, and it happens. And it happens more than not. And so you have to deal with it on the fly. So we're gonna have a couple of projects like that.
Yeah. So talking about the fall semester and all the COVID thing going on, do you think like the COVID, how do you think it affected like architecture? Did it fast forward things? Did it slow down things? How do you see it?
I was teaching a second year design studio, and I've been to your school, so I've seen what y'all done, and it's very similar in terms of the project type and so forth. And so we switched over to all online right after spring break. Students didn't come back from spring break. And the way our semester was set up, we went, and at that point, it's all design critiques and the project. The students have had the project for a couple of weeks. So I found out, what I found out was intriguing was I had my student class, it was pretty good. I didn't really have any weak students. They all were pretty good. But I had a number of them that were very quiet when we were meeting one-on-one. They didn't speak up in class. They didn't, they didn't answer, but they wouldn't speak up. I was always one or two students. And what I found out when we moved over to online is they became more vocal. And they were more engaged. And yes, the vocal students were always engaged, but these students tended to be more vocal. And that surprised me. And the other thing that surprised me too was the students that didn't want to engage, it was easier for them not to engage. And it's a little different. When you come to class, you're there. You have to engage with people. When you're online, you don't have to. You can say, "Oh, my internet's messing up. Sorry." There's ways of getting around it. And and because of the stress, I had one or two students who just kind of bugged out. I didn't see one student for over a month, and that was trying like every day, emailing them, calling them, nothing. And so the day before our final jury, this one student contacts me and says, "What can I do?" Kind of difficult. And they say, "I want to present." It's like, "I haven't seen your work. I don't even know where you're at." No. So pretty much at that point, I had to redo a whole month's sort of teaching with that one student to engage them. So I think in architecture, I think it's easier. I think it's a little bit easier now, especially if you're an upper level student, to engage online and to especially design critique. I find it a little easier actually because I have more tools versus like if I was in a class and we're just sitting down looking at a project. I may be able to sketch something on a piece of paper or something, or maybe if I brought my laptop in, I could draw on it or show them stuff. But I find it a lot easier when I'm engaged with the student in this medium to pull something, share my screen, show them something, sketch something really quickly, and we're recording it so they have it. I find it very easy and liberating. A lot of faculty, a lot of students don't see it that way, but I do. And I'm going to be incorporating some of those techniques a little more. Although we are at OU, we're going to be teaching in person, unless we have a class that has more than 30 students, and that's all online. But design studio, we're supposed to teach in the studio. But I'm going to be doing hybrids. I'm going to be doing both. So we'll see.
You're doing both. All right.
Well, are yours all online, or are you meeting in person?
We're going to be in online.
Online?
Yeah, we're going to be online. maybe into spring semester we'll be hybrid, but we still don't know.
We don't know. Okay. That's interesting. Okay. It's good to know.
Yeah.
I think personally, I think what's going to happen is we're going to be in school for like 2 or 3 weeks. And then all of a sudden a lot of people are going to get sick and we're going to go online.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
So I'll be designing my course to have it to be, both my courses I'm teaching to be online at one point or another.
Yeah.
I've decided to already do that. But it was easy for me in the spring because I already had my class set up all online anyway. So it was very easy. I didn't have any problems versus some did, but not in our year level. The other professors and I, with the way we set up the course, it was very easy to move to it.
Yeah, that's really cool. So that was pretty much of all the questions I had. I want to thank you so much for your time.
No problem. I enjoyed it.
This concludes our program. Thank you for listening to ARC Talks Present, brought to you by EPCC Architecture Society, an interview with Anthony Criccho. This is your host, David Ruiz. Until next time.